In October of 2000, both Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Norman were shot to death, and their bodies were discovered in an Indianapolis dumpster. Their roommates, Sarah Jo Pender, who was 21 at the time of the shootings, and her then boyfriend Richard Hall, were ultimately both found guilty of their murders. 6 years after Pender was subsequently sentenced to 110 years in prison, she mounted a dramatic escape from the Rockville Correctional Facility in Indiana. Pender, who was previously dubbed the female Charles Manson by the prosecutor on her case, dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and evaded law enforcement for over 130 days. The new docuseries, Girl on the Run, The Hunt for America's Most Wanted Woman, examines the captivating story of the chase and Pender's life after. Tom Pearson, the show's executive producer, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is Tom Pearson, one of the executive producers of Girl on the Run, The Hunt for America's Most Wanted Woman. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Your new docuseries tells the story of Sarah Jo Pender, who at only 23 years old was sentenced to 110 years in prison for the murders of two of her roommates. She maintained she did not shoot them to death. She wasn't the mastermind behind their murders, but instead the co-defendant and her ex-boyfriend Richard Hull was responsible. 6 years after she was convicted for the double murder, she escaped prison with the help of a prison guard, as well as a network of former inmates who were her friends who were then outside. The story made national headlines. She was featured on America's Most Wanted, and she was effectively on the lam for well over 100 days. I mean, this is a story that is straight out of a movie. But to start off the conversation, what drew you to it?
So my colleagues, Stuart and Max, actually first met Sarah Pender back in 2013. They were making a documentary for a UK channel with Sir Trevor MacDonald, and Sarah had just finished spending 5 years in isolation. And they spoke with her, and they were struck both by her and by her story. And so we kept in touch over the next few years. And then we got to the point where we were in a position where we could tell her story.
I'm wondering how something like this exactly gets made, because you got a lot of people on board for conversations that were all featured in the story in one way or another. Sarah herself sat down for extensive interviews. You talked to her parents, her ex-boyfriend, and the co-defendant, a former inmate who was her friend on the outside who helped her escape after she left, the prosecutor, the U.S. Marshal who was hunting her down. I mean, how did this all come together?
So we've got a really good team that's been making the series, and they've been working to get access to agree interviews with people for a number of years, actually. And like all access processes, it's a case of communication, being clear about what your intent is, what you're looking to make, and making sure that people understand that we're here to tell their story as they experienced it. You know, we don't have a host, we don't have an agenda. It's just an opportunity for people to set out their experiences as they lived them. And of course, there are different versions of events from different people connected with this story. But that's how they experienced it.
To that point, because there were drastic different descriptions of Sarah Pender based on who exactly you spoke to. I mean, this really impacted everyone. So what was exactly your intent? And did any conversation change the trajectory of this series? Because it was really interesting to hear Sarah Pender's perspective, her proclaiming her innocence, her talking about her time on the run, her time 5 years in solitary confinement. I mean, one of the conversations, though, that moved me the most was the U.S. Marshal who was hunting her down. And he talked about the toll this took on his life. He said he lost his marriage, he lost his kids over this manhunt and his involvement in trying to track her down. What was that conversation for you, if there was one that changed the trajectory of this?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. So very often with law enforcement officials, the interviews are based on the process, the sort of the professional steps that they've taken in the investigation that they've been involved in. And I think what was unique about Ryan is, for him, this hunt for Sarah became existential. He speaks very openly about the fact that very often a prisoner escapes, you get them in 24, 48 hours. And when he got notified he was out there to look for Sarah, he didn't think anything of it. He thought it was another day in the office. He had no idea about how big a hunt it would become. and the huge toll it would take on his personal life. And I think what's unique about Ryan is he speaks about not just what he's doing in terms of chasing Sarah down, but also how that impacted upon his life at home.
And I think you could really tell, it really came across, at least to me as a viewer, that he took this personally. This wasn't just some 9 to 5 job that he clocked out. He could turn this off. I mean, this really, it seemed to consume him. But he described Sarah as one way, as someone who could easily manipulate others around her, someone who could use people for favors and then move on. Sarah was described by the prosecutor at the time as the female Charles Manson. That changed, obviously, and we can get into that later. She was also described as someone who was considerate. Everyone, whether they were tracking Sarah down or they were her friend, said how smart she was. I mean, she went to Purdue University for a time. She was studying a science-related major there. How would you describe Sarah Pender? What was she like to you? Did you get the sense when you were talking to her, oh, this is someone who can manipulate people? Did you get the sense that her father said she was kind and compassionate and caring and considerate? What was that for you?
So she is undoubtedly incredibly intelligent. She's very articulate. She is able to give an account of her life in extraordinary detail, which is actually quite unique, I would say, amongst people that we've filmed with. And in terms as to whether she's manipulative or charming, there are two very different views. You know, there's a fence and people fall one side or the other. There are those that love and care for her who would describe her as charming, and there are those that have been involved in her prosecution and law enforcement who would describe her as manipulative. So there are completely different views as to who she is. But she has had some extraordinary labels put on her by the media, by the prosecutor. And I think part of the reason that she wanted to do this, it was an opportunity to actually speak at length about her experiences and move beyond the more concise news reports and talk about what her life was and how it came to be that she ended up where she did.